Hey, it's Mike from the Run Testers. In this video, we have got a new watch to talk about. This here is the Garmin Enduro. So this is a new watch range for Garmin. Now, it's a watch that is aimed at endurance athletes. So ultra runners, trail runners, people who spend a lot of time out on their feet. And the big sell here is that Garmin is going big on battery life. So bigger than what you get on the Phoenix, on things like the Chorus Vertix, things like the Polar Vantage V2 and the Grit-X. Now we've kind of got an early look at it, just had enough time to get a few runs, slightly scuppered by the kind of wintry conditions we've had in the UK. So yeah, we thought we'd give you kind of initial thoughts on the Enduro until a few more of us have it. So yeah, here's our take on the Garmin Enduro. Okay, so what is the Enduro? So as I said, it is a new watch for Garmin, a new range for them. And the big sell is battery life. Now, Garmin have said they don't want you to think of this as kind of a stripped down Phoenix, but it's quite difficult to kind of not see that when it's very similar to what you get from the Phoenix 6X Pro. From a design point of view, you've got a 51mm case, which is the same as the 6X or 6X Pro. Roughly the same thickness, same in terms of the kind of the button layout, same display, same resolution. So there's a lot that's similar. Now, what is different is they've tried to build this watch to be as light as possible, which is something, there's little differences that can in weight can mean for ultra runners and endurance athletes. So the first thing is that you've got a titanium bezel and case, so that instantly drops the weight down in comparison to what you get on the something like the Phoenix 6X and the 945 as well. It's not quite as light as a 945, but it's still very light. You also have a stainless steel version, which is a little bit heavier. I've had the titanium one to use. And you've also got a nylon strap. So another way to reduce that weight, but also still get something that is really comfortable to kind of wear. It's a good quality nylon strap. It's one I've been able to kind of wear without any issue. I've worn it to sleep. I've worn it during the day. It's been absolutely fine. Obviously on running as well, it's been no issues. It's a nice tight fit, comfortable fit. Jumping in the shower with it, it doesn't stay too wet afterwards for too long, and that's a nice little thing. So it's a good quality nylon strap. The case is nice and light. You do notice the difference. I've noticed the difference kind of next to kind of my 6 Pro. So you can, that idea of creating a lighter watch, definitely I feel like the Enduro's kind of delivered on that. Little things to kind of notice, you've got this ring around the watch face, which is a little bit different to what you get on the solar watches. I think maybe it's a little bit nicer, gives it a nicer look and kind of disguises that solar power display that you've got in here, which is what we've seen on the 6X, 6 Pro, and now 6S Pro as well, and the Instinct. But generally, yeah, it feels very similar to what I've experienced in the Phoenix 6 generally, which I've used long term. It definitely feels lighter. I've had no real issues from a comfort point of view in my time with it. And yeah, like I said, it's, maybe Garmin doesn't want you to think of this as a kind of stripped back 6X Pro, but there's a lot of kind of similarities here with that watch. Okay, so let's talk about that battery life, because that is the big play with the Enduro here. Now, I've pulled together kind of comparison in terms of how it's pure kind of GPS battery life numbers compared to some other watches. Now, essentially, what Garmin is saying is you can get 70 hours of full GPS battery life off the Enduro. That can get up to 80 hours when you kind of factor in the solar charging tech that it also has on board. Now, if you look at something like the Fenix 6X Pro, which has 60 hours, so it's kind of an extra 10 hours. The Cross Vertex has 60, promises 60 hours as well. The Polar Vantage V2 and the Grit X is around 40 hours. So it's class leading in that respect. I don't have the kind of ultra track numbers and the kind of more power saving battery mode numbers, but for pure GPS battery life, that's quite a step up from the competition. It's an extra 10 hours on the 6X, which is pretty big, and well, you know, you've got that extra on top as well when you kind of factor in solar charging. Even without that, it's still quite a big number and jump over what you have over its competitors. So yeah, in terms of battery life, pure numbers, Enduro kind of sits at the top at the moment. Obviously, whether that plays out in terms of testing is another question, but in terms of those pure numbers, the Enduro is well ahead in terms of its competition. So one of the new features is an advanced version of ClimbPro. So ClimbPro is that feature where you can kind of get better sense of those kind of tougher kind of courses, you know, hillier courses, you know, to kind of know how to better strategize for races and routes. So before you could only kind of look at the ascent aspect of kind of climbs. Now on the Enduro, you're getting the ability to see the descent information as well, to ultimately give you a better sense again of, you know, trying to work out, get a better sense of a route, when to kind of go hard on a course or on a route, on a hilly route, and when you can kind of save yourself. And ultimately, it's a nice extra piece of information to have. Now, that feature is based on being able to create that course, which obviously is done in Garmin Connect, which I have not been able to use yet on the Enduro. So it's not a feature that I've been able to get an experience of. Also, the other side of things is that potentially I think this feature could be rolled out onto other watches. You know, ultimately you've got the same information, the same sensors in kind of the Fenix and 945 to kind of potentially give you that advanced or improved ClimbPro feature. Now, it's not something Garmin have said that it's going to happen. We're just kind of, you know, predicting that maybe it could end up rolling out on the on those other watches. But yeah, so for the Enduro, it is debuting that advanced ClimbPro feature, which is one we haven't been able to test just yet. Now, in terms of kind of the UI, the watch UI, the layout of everything, it's all very familiar if you've used a Fenix. One of the big things that has been introduced on this watch is a new dedicated ultra run mode. Now with the ultra mode, there's kind of one main thing that's quite an interesting addition to kind of ultra modes in general. So you now have a rest timer. So essentially that's designed for when you kind of hit aid stations. It kind of cuts out the GPS, so you don't have that kind of squiggle around in one spot on the GPS, and basically to take better consideration of those kind of rest periods during your kind of your runs. And then everything else, all the kind of training modes, the sensors, everything you expect from a Fenix is here on the Enduro. So from that point of view, it's going to feel very familiar to use. For ultra runners, there's that dedicated ultra mode here now, and that rest timer, which I imagine will be a kind of nice, desirable feature for anyone that's kind of putting in those big long miles and races. So another big feature for trail runners is the Trail VO2 Max. So essentially what it's saying is that it can generate a VO2 Max score based a lot more reliably in terms of your environment and trail environment. So, you know, a more challenging environment than running on road. Now, it's a feature that I've been able to test in kind of one run really, and I didn't test against a chest strap because I was testing the battery life, so it kind of would have factored into that. So pure VO2 Max scores or trail VO2 Max scores from the Enduro compared to the Fenix. So I got a 51 on the Enduro and a 53 on the Fenix 6 Pro. So ultimately that's where they kind of should be. It shouldn't really drastically differ really, but it's another piece of information. Ultimately, if you spend a lot of times outdoors running, kind of out off-road, this kind of metric is essentially saying it can give you a better idea of what that terrain means for your VO2 and ultimately give you something a bit more reliable. So definitely another one that just in my short period of time I've not really been able to really test its fullest, but that's kind of a snapshot of what it is and kind of one of the scores that I've got from one of the runs I've done with this. So with the Enduro, there's two notable kind of omissions in terms of features that you do get on the Phoenix that you don't get on the Enduro. The first is a music player, which I kind of get. It's a pretty big kind of battery drain in general, in terms of, you know, when we've tested kind of forerunners with music streaming, it does have a noticeable impact on battery life. So that one kind of makes sense. The other big one is mapping. So you don't get the full color mapping that you get on the Phoenix and 945. What you do get is you get the breadcrumb navigation, which you kind of get on cheaper forerunner watches. You can still upload routes onto here. You just won't get that kind of rich detail mapping that you get on those other watches. Now, whether that's a big deal is open for debate, really. You know, whether trail runners, ultra runners will miss that mapping, you know, it's definitely up for debate. I would have liked to seen the mapping here. You know, I totally appreciate the battery kind of drain that mapping has and will have, and for a lot of people that breadcrumb navigation will be just enough. But out of those two features that are missing from the Enduro that you get on the top end Phoenix and most of the Phoenix range, mapping is kind of the most interesting one here that they've decided to leave out. They've left it out because of battery life. That's why, and whether that's a good call, good decision, only time will tell. And kind of people who are out there spending a lot of time on their feet will miss that feature. But those are the key things to kind of keep in mind with Enduro compared to the Phoenix. You're missing that built-in music player, not such a big deal, we don't think, but you are also missing that mapping support as well. So in terms of general running performance, actually very good. Now, in terms of the GPS, I had the first couple of runs I had a few issues. It was taking quite a while to lock onto a signal. After those first couple of runs, those issues kind of went away. And in terms of the accuracy, I was comparing it to a 6 Pro and pretty much kind of spot on in terms of things like pace and cadence and kind of distance track. So from those kind of pure kind of running core tracking features, no major issue for me. And once those kind of GPS kind of signal lock on issues kind of disappeared on the kind of shorter runs and the kind of one bigger run I did, the Enduro was pretty good. So yeah, so far so good in terms of the GPS tracking and what I got from the Enduro. So in terms of testing the battery life, now I admit I did not run an ultra. I didn't have enough time. I don't really have that in my legs. I'll leave that to Kieran to test when he gets hold of it. So what I did do is I tried to get a sense of what the battery life was like. So I've done a few runs, some shorter runs, a longer kind of trail run, so out for a few hours. Those shorter runs, kind of 40 minutes to an hour, I had it up against the Phoenix 6 Pro, and generally for those runs it was, you know, full GPS mode. It was 1% drop off for those shorter runs, which is kind of what I expected. And I also have to keep in mind that, you know, this is a watch I couldn't pair to Garmin Connect, the Garmin Connect app yet, so you know, no notifications, nothing like that kind of impeding on the kind of potential battery life and the drop off. So pure GPS, it was 1%. On the longer trail run, so I had it on alongside, or on the other wrist I had the Phoenix 6 Pro and I had the Polar Grit-X to get a sense of how it kind of matched up some other watches, all in full GPS mode. I didn't have them paired to a heart rate chest strap, so really just kind of focusing on the GPS, how those kind of cope in those conditions. Very scientifically, I wrote everything down on a piece of paper. So in terms of the Phoenix 6 Pro, it was about 7 to 8% drop off for kind of just over 2 hours of running. For the Enduro, it was 4%. On the Grit-X, it was 2%. Now, the Grit-X was at charged up fully at 100%. I've been kind of monitoring the battery drop off daily with the Phoenix 6 and the Enduro, so I haven't had those at 100%. So that's maybe why it's such a small amount on the Grit X, but still, you know, impressive for the Polar regardless. As I said, you know, I didn't have this paired to anything else, so there was nothing really, you know, can see the drain. But for that pure kind of full GPS mode, pretty good, I think. Pretty impressed. It was a huge drop off. A bit more on the 6 Pro, clearly. Now, it was connected to my phone. I did have notifications running. So, you know, those extra kind of battery drains, something to keep in mind. But in those kind of few runs, the battery life seemed to kind of hold up. As I said, I haven't run kind of ultra distance with it, and that's really where you're going to get a sense of how well this full GPS battery life works. But we'll wait until Kieran probably get some ultra testing with this and kind of get a sense of where the battery life sits for the Enduro next to the things like the Phoenix 6 X and the Grit X and Vantage V2 and the Chorus Vertix as well, which has slightly less battery life promised, but is a good battery performer in the testing that we've done. So in terms of heart rate performance now, I mainly focused that testing so far on the kind of shorter runs, and what I found, it wasn't great. I was comparing this to Phoenix 6 Pro paired up to a Garmin HRM Pro, and while kind of averages were kind of fine, the kind of pure numbers in terms of max heart rate was definitely noticeably higher on the Enduro. And I don't know whether that's down to the fits, but clearly there's, you know, it wasn't great in terms of the runs I've done in terms of that heart rate data. So I've not been able to get into the Connect app to really get a sense of what that data looks like. But on those kind of brief couple of runs that I've done against the chest strap, it's telling me that, you know, you're really going to need to pair up a chest strap with the Enduro to get the most of its kind of heart rate insights and metrics. Okay, so there you have it. That is our initial take on the Garmin Enduro. Now, hopefully some of the other guys in the team will get hold of one soon so we can give you a kind of a full comprehensive verdict on the Enduro. So yeah, in the time being, if you've got any questions, let us know in the comments. As always, like and subscribe, hit that bell, wherever that is, to find out about new videos. And yeah, we'll see you for the next Run Testers video.